And ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, as you see over my left shoulder, and as you see here in terms of what I'm posting in the center of the screen, today is about President's House slash Slavery Memorial. Let me repeat that. Today is about the President's House slash Slavery Memorial. And right there is a button for a group called ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. And I guess I should start at the very beginning. You see Roland up on the screen has our website, avengingtheancestors.com. And I'm going to give you some additional information throughout the show. What you need to remember first and foremost are an email address and a phone number because I can't get everything in during this 1 hour show. So it's incumbent upon you to contact us. And by us, I mean attack by email, preferably, but if necessary, by phone. Here's the email address. I'm going to say it slowly 3 times. ATAC dot avenging the ancestors at gmail.com. ATAC dot avenging the ancestors at gmail.com. One more time for the email address, folks. ATAC dot avenging the ancestors at gmail.com. In addition, there's the phone number 215 552 8751. 215 552 8751. Once again, 215 552 8751. And you see, once again, Roland has that number right there. Just write that down. Call us 24/7, 215 552 8751. This show today is about how to resist and defeat racist censorship. Once again, Roland's all on the money. This guy is underpaid. He should be making $15,000 an hour or day, either one. But he put up there on the screen for you to see atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. And I really need you to email us because, as I said, I can't cover everything today. Email us, we'll send you everything. Today's show is about resisting and defeating racist governmental censorship. Let me repeat that. Today's show is all about resisting and defeating racist governmental censorship. Many of you by now in the Philadelphia area, in the Pennsylvania area, in America, probably know that the guy in the White House sent some vandals with gigantic crowbars to rip off the walls of the President's House slash Slavery Memorial at 6th and Market all of the written information about that site. So all of the information you need to put that site into context, to understand that site, to comprehend that site, all that information was pried off by vandals from the White House. And I'm going to get into where those items are that were pried off violently with gigantic crowbars. So let me first say, if you're excited about what you just heard, you got to do something about it. And there's two things throughout the show we're going to try to flash on the screen. There's a petition that you need to look at and sign and disseminate to family, friends, and others. That's number one, a petition. The second thing is a rally coming up this Tuesday. That's Tuesday, February 10 at 3:30. More about that flyer, more about that petition and more about the flyer that advertises or announces for the upcoming event. So let me give you all the background to put all this in context. Remember what I said at the beginning of the show. Today is about resisting and defeating racist governmental censorship. Write it down. Resisting and defeating racist governmental censorship. So for the first 3-4 minutes of today's show, I wanted to just set the stage, and then I'm going to fill in the blanks, like right now. This story begins nearly a quarter century ago, 24 years to be precise. It began in June of 2002 when there was a local newspaper article that reported about the Liberty Bell Center then in 2002 at 5th and Market, moving a block west to 6th and Market. And the reason that the Liberty Bell Center then at 5th and Market was moving is because that 5th and Market Street site was too cramped. It was too crowded. It was too congested. So the National Park Service found a spacious area 1 block west at 6th and Market. That's the first part of the story I want you to remember. Okay, so Liberty Bell Center, it moves from 5th and Market to 6th and Market because there was more space at 6th and Market. And literally 1 million or more or around there, tourists each year would come to see the Liberty Bell, and it just got too cramped, too congested, too crowded, so they found larger spacing. And by the way, at the time, 2002, I was working with one of the greatest lawyers in Philadelphia history, black or white, male or female, gay or straight, anybody. One of the greatest, when we talk about some of the great civil rights litigators in Philadelphia legal history, of course, you're talking about Cecil B. Moore and you're talking about Charles Bowser. And I had the benefit of working with Charles Bowser. Remember, this is 2002, and I mentioned Charles Bowser, the great Charles W. Bowser Esquire, because he was a mover and shaker. He knew everybody, everybody knew him. He was also a good friend of Mary Mason, and Mary Mason was the most prominent radio talk show for Black Philadelphia, I'd say from the late 60s until the late 80s. So for 20, 30 years, Mary Mason on that Black owned and operated radio station would talk about issues affecting the Black community. But every now and then, Mary Mason had a vacation time where she might have been sick or she couldn't do the show. So Charles Bowser said, hey, Mary Mason, this kid, Michael Cord, he likes to talk a lot. Can he be your guest host when you're unavailable? So I was the guest host, and that's how my radio career started. So I mentioned that because when the first part of the story broke that the Liberty Bell Center was moving, I reported that to the African American audience of that radio station. And basically what the audience, the Black audience said was this: hey, that's interesting, but it's really not relevant to us as Black people. Whew, I needed that orange juice. Actually, apple juice. So remember the first part, because we're going to have a test at the end. So when the news reported that the Liberty Bell Center was moving from 5th and Market to 6th and Market, I announced that to the African American audience of this particular radio station, and they pretty much said interesting but not really relevant. But the second thing we found out in that 2002 article is that the new site of the Liberty Bell Center, now 6th and Market, is where America's first White House stood. Think about that. From 1790 to 1797, 2 presidents lived there. You had George Washington and you had John Adams. So based on something called the Federal Residence Act of 1790, Philadelphia was designated the nation's capital. Why not DC? Because DC was swampland. They had to build up DC. And while they were building up DC, they said that they would have Philadelphia as the temporary capital. So based on that 1790 Federal Residence Act, Philadelphia became the nation's capital. And that site at 6th and Market, known as the President's House, the Executive Mansion, the Robert Morris Mansion, but it served as America's first White House. So I announced that to the predominantly African American audience of that particular radio station. And again, they said, hey, interesting, but not really relevant to us. The third thing we found out in that same 2002 newspaper article is that the first president of the United States of America, George Washington, enslaved Black men, Black women, and Black children at America's first White House. Remember, the first thing we found out, Liberty Bell Center moves. The second thing we found out, it moved to the site of America's first White House. The third thing we found out was that George Washington enslaved Black men, women, and children there. And I got to tell you, I felt betrayed. I was even angrier than I always am. I'm known as the angriest Black man in America, and this was a reason to be angry. And so in my anger, and by the way, that phrase, the angriest Black man in America, came from paraphrasing what the great James Baldwin said back in the late 60s, early 70s. James Baldwin said, and this is paraphrasing, to be Black and conscious in America is to be in a constant state of rage. And what did he mean by that? He meant that if you're Black and you know about slavery, you got to be enraged. If you're black and know about sharecropping, you got to be enraged. If you're black and you know about convict leasing, you got to be enraged. If you're black and you know about Jim Crow and mass incarceration and redlining and gerrymandering and police brutality and disenfranchisement, if you're black, you know all those things, you got to be angry. If you're not angry, it's clearly something wrong with you. But James Baldwin made it clear that the anger has to be constructive. The anger has to be productive. You don't go out and attack people because you're angry. What's that going to do? You can attack somebody, you can kill somebody. That's not going to help your cause. You got to do something constructive. You got to do something productive. And that's where education comes in. That's where reading comes in. And now you're armed with a serious weapon. The greatest threat to white America is not a young black man with a gun. The greatest threat to America is a young black man, woman, or child with a book. Because once you get that knowledge, you can do everything you need to do. So let me back up a little bit. So the Liberty Bell Center moves. It moves to 6th and Market. 6th and Market is America's first White House from 1790 to 1797. And that's where George Washington enslaved black men, women, and children. Many of us knew that he had enslaved a lot of black people in Virginia. In fact, in Mount Vernon, Virginia, at his plantation, he had 316 black men, women, and children. And from that, he took 9 and brought them to Philadelphia. And he held them here in brutal bondage under slavery. And I have to tell you something about that enslavement, because it's critically important to understanding how we get to where we are today. Um, Not only did George Washington hold 9 black men, women, and children in bondage under brutal slavery right here in Philadelphia at 6th and Market, America's first White House, but he did it illegally. And you all might say, give me a second, folks. I don't know why that's so delicious today. Anyway, you might say, okay, Mike, I concede that slavery was horrible, but from 1619 to 1865, 1619, that's the birth of American slavery beginning August 25, 1619. And then we get to the 13th Amendment in December of 1865. So in that interim, that 246-year interim, somebody could argue, hey, Mike, slavery was horrible, but it wasn't illegal. Well, what George Washington did was illegal because he brought those 9 black men, women, and children into Pennsylvania, and he brought them here in 1790. But let's go back 10 years earlier to 1780. 1780, Pennsylvania passed something called the Gradual Abolition Act. And the reason why Pennsylvania was quote unquote or kind of sort of progressive in doing that is the Quakers, a good bunch of spiritual people. I don't even want to call the Quakers religious people because to me, religion is a man-made kind of thing that's too structured, and you got to go through intermediaries to talk to the creator if you believe in all that. The thing I love about people who are spiritual as opposed to religious, the spiritual people tend to be kinder, and they tend to deal with their creator in their own way. And they tend to help their fellow man, their fellow woman, their fellow boy or girl. They do good work. So big shout out to the Quakers. Anyway, because of their political influence, they were able to get Pennsylvania. Yeah, political influence here in Pennsylvania. William Penn, in fact, was a Quaker. But anyway, because of the Quaker ideology and how they had some degree of influence in politics, the state legislature in Pennsylvania decided to pass something called the Gradual Abolition Act. And this Gradual Abolition Act became law in 1780. And it basically said this: if you come into Pennsylvania and you bring in enslaved people and you hold them in Pennsylvania for 6 straight months under the Gradual Abolition Act, they can petition for their freedom at the end of that 6 months. So what did George Washington do? Some people try to say, well, he skirted the law, because what he would do is he would bring these black people into Pennsylvania. He'd hold them for about 5 months, 29 days. Then he'd take them back across state lines, whether to anywhere, New Jersey, Delaware, back to Virginia, whatever the case might be, and then turn them around and bring them right back. And that way, the 6 month deadline starts all over again. So he was kind of skirting the law. He was playing a game. But here's the thing, he wasn't merely skirting the law, and he wasn't just playing a game, he was breaking the law and committing crimes. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is when you think about the law, you got to factor in, is that law the same as it was when it first passed? Because this law we're talking about is the Gradual Abolition Act. But 8 years later, in 1788, the legislature said, hey, for the past 8 years, we've been hearing about these shenanigans going on where white men would bring enslaved black people into Pennsylvania, and these white men knew about our 6 month law. They would then take these enslaved black people across state lines for a day or two and then bring them back. Well, in 1788, the legislature said, hey, if we find out you're doing that, we're going to expedite the process to free those enslaved blacks, and we're going to increase the fine on the people who violate the law. So George Washington comes in 2 years later in 1790. So all that rotating stuff might have been good in 1780, 1781, 1782, 1783, 1784, 1785, 1786, 1787. But as of 1788, the legislature filled in that gap. So you could no longer, as historians say, quote, unquote, rotate the slaves. I always stay away from the word slave because my ancestors were not slaves. They were enslaved people who, while in Africa, didn't have the guns they needed to defend themselves. They were physicians, they were fishermen, they were soldiers, they were carpenters, they were builders. They were doing everything that an advanced society could do. Unfortunately, it didn't have the military firepower to withstand the Portuguese and other Europeans, hence the birth of slavery. So I don't call my ancestors slaves. I call them enslaved people who didn't have enough guns. But I digress. Let me get back to the point. So when George Washington began to rotate my ancestors, those nine, he wasn't just skirting the law, he was breaking the law. So when we found out the black community, because remember, I'm on this radio show in 2002 and I'm putting all this information out. And when people heard that part, they went ballistic. And I called the leading grassroots community activists to the office I was working at. That was the Bowser Law Center under the jurisdiction of the great Charles W. Bowser Esquire. So we're in this fancy conference room and we're just strategizing. It must have been about 8, 9, 10, maybe, I don't know, 15 of us strategizing as to what we should do. And the first thing we did is to come up with our name. And somebody said, hey, Mike, let's call it Attack. I'm like, Attack, Attack. Why would we call it? They said, no, you always talk about our ancestors. You go back in time and talk about our ancient African ancestors. And you talk about how they invented medicine and monotheism and the pyramids and algebra and calculus and geometry and all those great things. You talk about those ancient African ancestors. You also talk about our enslaved ancestors. And when it comes to the enslaved ancestors, they said to me, Mike, you always talk about avenging them and fighting for them. So why don't we call ourselves Attack, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition? And I'm like, that's genius, absolute genius. So Attack was born in mid-June of 2002. And once we came together and coalesced, we had a great strategy. And the strategy was this: we're going to raise hell. We're going to protest and demonstrate and picket and resist because we want some type of memorial or monument to our enslaved ancestors at that site. Because the federal government, once they realized where they were, 6th and Market, America's First White House, they began to talk about doing something to honor the site, but nothing to do with the enslaved Africans. So we decided to attack that. Once we got all this powerful information, historical information from a great historian by the name of Ed Lawler, we took Ed Lawler's historical information and converted it into cultural ammunition and took it to the streets, protested, demonstrated, petitioned, all that kind of stuff. But the first thing we did before any of that, strategically, we said, we need to make this thing official. It's a wonderful thing to have a grassroots community activist organization involved, but we can only take it to a certain point. We got to then pass the baton to somebody with power to see if they can take our fuel to run the car. So we wrote letters. This was so strategic. We wrote a letter, the same letter, but addressed to different people. And you received that letter in 2002 if you were a city elected official. So if you were in city council, Philadelphia City Council, and you were black, you got a letter. If you were a mayor, the mayor in 2002, and you were black, you got a letter. And by the way, John Street was the mayor, and I'm going to tell you why that's so important. You got a letter if you were a city elected official and black. You also got a letter if you were a state senator or a state representative with an office in Philadelphia. You got a letter. And if you were in Congress, but based in Philly and were black, you got a letter. So the letter went to Congressman Shaka Fattah. But Bob Brady had done a lot of stuff with the African American community politically. So we sent him a letter. And maybe 4 or 5 days after we sent that letter, we get a response, a letter from Mayor John Street. And what the letter says is, hey, Michael, hey, Attack, this is great information. I, like you, didn't know anything about this until you stumbled across it, and now you're sharing it with me. So I'm not just, this is the mayor talking, John Street, I'm not just going to praise you for putting all this together. I'm going to make it official. Mayor John Street said, I'm going to start something called the Mayor's Oversight Committee. And first and foremost, I'm going to have an Attack representative with us. By the way, very quickly, folks, I showed you the Attack button that we have now, but back in 2002, here's one of our old original buttons. There's a brother who gave me this button just a couple weeks ago, and if he gives me permission to say his name, I will say it. But he kept this. I, as the founder, didn't even have this original Attack button, but he did. So that's the old one, almost a quarter century old, 24 years ago. And now more recently, in the last couple weeks, we have our new and updated one. And we'll tell you at the end of this show today how you can get a copy of it. So we sent these letters out. Mayor John Street responded. He started this official group called the Mayor's Oversight Committee to look into the site. But he did more than that. He put his money where his mouth was, because he then kicked in $1.5 million to make the process legitimate so we can run with it. And that set the stage for Congressman Bob Brady and Congressman Shaka Fattah to kick in an additional $3.5 million. And now we were legit. Now we were official. Now we were serious, even more than we were before. And the fact that the mayor would pull in Attack to be a representative on this oversight committee spoke volumes, because the other folks were professors and historians and scholars and archaeologists and National Park Service officials. And the fact that Attack, a grassroots pro-black organization, was at that table and was able to hold our own so much that in, I believe it was October of 2005, the prestigious and scholarly and highfalutin entity called the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, they reached out to Attack and said, your story is phenomenal, not just for the activism that you wear on your sleeve and you do it so well, but also the way you talk about this stuff. You all have gotten information from all types of historians, from Philadelphia, historians from Pennsylvania, historians from across the country. And the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography asked Attack to write an article. And I should have gotten it out before the show, but I got a bookshelf there, and a bookshelf, out there in the living room. But I'm not going to get up and go get the book. I wanted to show you, but I can talk about it, the approximately 25 page scholarly article I wrote and sent it to the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography, and they published it. So if you want to know the full story, make sure you email me at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Our producer, our engineer, our DJ, Roland, put that up on the screen and say, hey, Mike, you were talking about this scholarly article from October of 2005 in the Pennsylvania Magazine of History and Biography. How can I get a copy? Email me at atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com, and I will get it to you. By the way, the article is entitled, and the ancestors brought it to me, and I just repeated what they said. It's a witty and substantive title of the article. It's called the black eye on George Washington's White House. The black eye on George Washington's White House. There's so many levels of messages in that title. And again, if you want to copy the article, just email us. So what we were able to do is to become legitimate, became a part of that oversight committee. But don't get it twisted. We never got rid of our activist bona fides, our revolutionary bona fides, our angry black men and women, and angry black boy and girl thing. We were working with the system, but we kept it moving in regard to our protesting, our resisting, our battling. And for 8 years, from 2002, when we were founded, up until December 15, 2010, we fought the good fight and won. You might say, hey, Michael, what happened on December 15, 2010? Well, thank you for asking. What happened is we had a grand opening of the first. And by the way, with this official grand opening, had this gigantic ribbon around the site, and Mayor Michael Nutter, because Mayor John Street had already served his term, and then Mayor Michael Nutter came in. So Mayor John Street ran the first three legs of the relay race, the first three legs. Then at the last leg, the quarter person, in this case, the quarterman, who was Mayor Michael Nutter, the new mayor, grabbed the baton from Mayor John Street and ran the last quarter of the race and won tremendously, so that on December 15, 2010, he was able to cut the ribbon for the grand opening of the first, I repeat, the first slavery memorial of its kind on federal property in the history of the United States of America. I got to repeat that. On December 15, 2010, at 12 noon, when Mayor Michael Nutter cut the ribbon for that site, that was the opening of the first, I repeat, the first slavery memorial of its kind on federal property in the history of the United States of America. When I say of its kind, it was phenomenal in terms of the design. I got to tell you, when we were fighting to get some type of memorial, I really didn't know what I was hoping for. I didn't know if it was going to be a statue or a waterfall or a museum type building. But what this black owned and operated architectural firm known as Kelly Maiello, headed by the great ancestor Emmanuel Kelly, the design he came up with was totally ingenious and mind blowing. He actually created a replica of the White House from 1790 in Philly, but he made it an outdoor exhibit. He made it a 24/7 accessible exhibit. You might say, what do you mean? Well, here's what I mean. He took the door frame, a wide door frame that George Washington used to walk in and out, and he replicated that. He then took the windows. On the left side of the door is one large window. On the right side of the door are two large windows. So Emmanuel Kelly, the great architect, put that at the front. So basically, as you enter this site, you're walking in it the same way George Washington walked in it. If you think that was great, I got something greater. Emmanuel Kelly then came up with this idea of putting motion activated TV monitors, 5 of them on the site. So as you walk into it, you see these 5 TV monitors scattered about. You don't have to turn them on or off. As soon as you walk near them, they will come on. And they had black reenactors playing the role of the 9 enslaved to tell you the story, their story of life through slavery under George Washington. So those TV monitors. So first, the replica of the front of the house, fascinating. The 5 TV monitors, fascinating. And something else that was maybe the most fascinating, as the Mayor's Oversight Committee began to drill down on what we were going to do, they literally dug holes in the ground to see what they could find, if anything. And then it's okay, nothing here, pour the dirt on top, nothing here. But they stumbled across something. Maybe, let's say 25 to 30 yards, 25 to 30 yards from the Market Street side. So if you're on the Market Street side and you walk approximately 25 to 30 yards straight ahead, there's this large glass enclosure maybe, I don't know, 5, 6 times the size of this room. And this large enclosure, glass enclosure, is called a vitrine. And the vitrine is a large glass house. But what was done here at 60 Market is you were allowed to look down into the ground because the archaeologists found out that, hey, the foundation walls of the kitchen of the White House from the 1790s was still intact. It was right there. So, in effect, you could look down into the ground through this vitrine and you could see 1790. You can see basically what George Washington saw, what the nine enslaved saw. So, we decided, the oversight committee, hey, this is a gold mine. We can't throw dirt back over top of this and then build a statue or waterfall or something on top of it. No, we got to leave this open so that people can see it. Hence the vitrine. So if you go there today, you can see that vitrine. But unfortunately, you won't see anything else. I get to that in just a second. So impressive were the main entrance, the three windows, and then as you walk in, you see these 5 different TV motion detector monitors telling you the story. That's impressive. Then you see the vitrine where you can look down and in effect see 1790. That's impressive. And as you go past the vitrine, you see this enclosure. I'd say maybe 20 feet long and maybe 10 to 12 feet wide. It looks like an open air large doghouse. But you know what it was? It was the slave quarters, where at least 4, possibly 3, so I should say at least 3, possibly 4, at least 3, possibly 4 of those 9 who were housed there were housed in this large dog house type construction known today as the slave quarters. And where that those slave quarters are situated, that contraption, that mini shack, here's the interesting thing, because you're walking south from Market to go in the building and past the TV monitors and past the vitrine. And now you come to the center left side. What do you have? You have the slave quarters. But remember what I told you at the outset, that the Liberty Bell Center moved from 5th and Market to 6th and Market. The new site of the Liberty Bell Center is now on the south side of Market Street, let's say halfway between Market and Chestnut. So when you walk through the President's House slash Slavery Memorial, you get into the new Liberty Bell Center. Well, remember what I just told you about the slave quarters? The slave quarters are situated, I'd say, about 20 feet from the Liberty Bell Center. So you got the slave quarters, take about 20 steps or so, you walk into the Liberty Bell Center. Now, think about what that means in a historical context. What it means is this: as you enter the heaven of liberty, the Liberty Bell Center, you literally have to cross the hell of slavery, the slave quarters, to get inside. If that's not the height of historical hypocrisy, nothing is. But there's more to the site. To the far left of the slave quarters is a large gray granite wall. And on that wall, the engravement of 9 names. So 9 names are engraved on that large, heavy, big, impressive, imposing wall. 9 names. And those 9 are the persons, men, women, and children who were enslaved by George Washington. So their story was told, and I'm sure if you were interested, you sat here and heard me spend the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes talking about it. You're like, wow, that's fascinating. So attack that started this movement and attack that still exists, you all must be ecstatic. Well, for 15 years we were. Remember, the grand opening took place on December 15 of 2010. Let's fast forward 15 years to January 2025, where the guy in the White House is sworn in. He's inaugurated. And on the day he was sworn in, on the day he was inaugurated, he issued dozens and dozens and dozens of executive orders. And every single one of those executive orders that dealt with Black people was anti-Black. everything that he issued in terms of black people during those dozens and dozens of executive orders on the day he was sworn in January of 2025, they were all anti-black. They were anti-DEI. They were anti-affirmative action. They were anti-critical race theory. Anything pertaining to black people, you out of luck. Remember, that's January of 2025. Fast forward to March of 2025, where he issues more executive orders. And this is what he says in effect. Hey, I'm looking around. It's the guy in the White House with the orange hair and all that kind of stuff, and orange makeup and whatever he got. But my point is, he says, hey, I'm looking around at all these federal historical sites, and I don't like what I see. And the reason why I don't like it is because it's gotten too black. It's not white enough. That's his racist mind talking. So he said what he would do because of that is get rid of anything that, quote, inappropriately disparages Americans past and living, unquote. Let me repeat that. Because he didn't like what he saw that told the truth about slavery and black folks' contributions to this country, he said that a lot of that stuff, quote, inappropriately disparages Americans past and living, unquote. So he's going to do something about it. And remember, that's March of 2025. Fast forward to May of 2025, where he gets his Interior Department Secretary, Doug Burgum. The Interior Department has jurisdiction of all federal lands in the United States. So when he sends his hitman, Doug Burgum, out, Doug Burgum in May of 2025 issues a directive. And in that directive, Doug Burgum, in effect, the guy in the White House, what they do is target Philadelphia, target 6th and Market, target the President's House Slavery Memorial. And they gave the site a 120-day deadline. So therefore, if the site as constructed by the city and the federal government beginning in 2007, 2008, and wrapping up in 2010, then the stormtroopers in the White House are going to come and do something. And in that May directive from Interior Department Secretary Doug Burgum, he had a 120-day deadline. So if you do the math, the 120th day was September 17 of 2025. Now, my organization, Attack ATAC, we knew who this guy in the White House was before he ran for office. Remember, in the 1970s, he showed his racism by banning black people from renting or leasing any of his apartments in New York. So we knew what he was about. We also knew that he was endorsed 3 times by the former head of the KKK, David Duke. Anytime the former KKK chief endorses you, that says a whole lot. Not just once, not twice, but 3 times. So we knew about his racism. And we knew, obviously, in January 2025 from the executive orders, it was all going to be anti-black. We knew in March of 2025 that he didn't like certain federal historical parks. And we knew in May of 2025 through his Interior Department secretary that Philly was targeted. A wise person once told me, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. We stayed ready from the very beginning, almost 25 years ago, almost a quarter century ago, 24 years ago in 2002. So we knew what was coming. The only thing we didn't know is when it was coming. We knew in May that it could come as soon as September 17. But September 17 came and went, and then October, then November, then December. Nothing happened until Thursday, January 22, 2026 at 2:57 p.m. Once again, that's January 22, 2026 at 2:57 p.m. when vandals from the White House came in with these gigantic crowbars. And one thing I didn't make clear to you at the beginning of my explanation about the site is the interpretive panels. All that stuff I told you about the TV monitors, all that stuff I told you about the windows and the doorway, all the stuff I told you about the vitrine, all the stuff I told you about the slave quarters, all the stuff I told you about the granite wall with the 9 names engraved, all that and more was part of what we call the interpretive panels. It interprets the site. So in writing, beginning into your left, as you walk in through that majestic entrance, to your left and throughout the site, weaving your way, there were interpretive panels, written information to explain what the site was about and to explain what you were looking at. It's like it was not just the bones of your body and the veins of your body and the blood of your body. It was everything that made you live. I guess the best way to describe it is it was the breath of your body. If you can't breathe, you can't live. So imagine somebody taking all your breath away and moving it someplace else. You die. Well, those panels, and it's a total of 34, those interpretive panels that would weave their way around the site to explain to you what was going on January 22, 2026, 2:57 p.m., the vandals slash henchmen from the White House used those gigantic crowbars and just ripped all that information off the wall. And to add insult to injury, they just tossed it in the back of a trunk like it was in the back of a pickup truck. Let me be clear. They just tossed those 34 items in the back of a pickup truck as if they were trash, like they had no real meaning. And I'm going to tell you about different types. There were some that weren't forcibly thrown because they were made of ceramic or glass, but all the metallic ones, maybe half or so, they were just tossed in the back of a pickup truck. Now you might say, okay, you're laying all this heavy stuff on us, these serious problems. What's the solution? Well, here's the solution. And it's not our doing. It's our elders and ancestors from the 50s and 60s, those civil rights workers who made sure that we would have the right to vote and would make sure that we would have decent housing and be able to vote. Even though some of that stuff is still an arm's length for many of us, the civil rights activists from the 50s and 60s were able to open the door and give us a fighting chance. Well, they had a two-pronged strategy that we're using today. Who is we? It's the attack of 2002, and it's the attack of 2026. ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. What we did was to take a page from the civil rights activists in the 50s and 60s. They had a two-pronged approach. One was to raise hell in the streets with activists. That was the role of Dr. King and even the Black Panthers and others, just in the streets, raising hell, righteous indignation, getting into what the great John Lewis called good trouble. And while you had the activists raising hell in the streets, you had attorneys raising legal issues in the courtroom, because you can't expect the activists to win it all by themselves. And you certainly can't expect the attorneys to win it all by themselves. They had to come together. So we've done that in attack, and we have increased our activism since January 22, 2026. And we not only have done that with the activism, we brought in some of the top legal minds in Philadelphia, arguably throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We have as our lead counsel Professor Kara McClellan. And Kara McClellan is a professor at law at the University of Penn Law School, but she also used to work at the Legal Defense Fund, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So she's at the helm of our lawyer dream team. And then we have the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. If you're not familiar with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, Google it, because that's the go-to organization for the most important civil rights issues over the past, I'd say 50 years or so, maybe even longer. And we have a secret weapon that I can't spend too much time talking about. Suffice it to say that it's a big firm, law firm, that's willing to assist us. So we got this legal dream team fighting furiously in court. And as I think I said earlier in the presentation, we've joined in with the city's lawsuit, which basically is to put the site back where it was, which means all those 34 panels with that written information, they all go back up, and the federal government agreed not to do it again. That's what the city is arguing. The city makes a compelling argument, as their great attorneys did last Friday, when they were talking about the issue of a contract, that there's an agreement between the city of Philadelphia and the federal government. And it was signed by both parties in 2006. And then there were two amendments. So between 2006 and 2009, there was this contract that basically said, hey, before any action is taken at the site concerning the site by the city the city has to consult with the federal government. On the same hand, if the federal government wants to take some action at the site, adding stuff, removing stuff, whatever, they got to consult with the city. Well, the federal government didn't do that. So they breached that contract, and there were other violations. And so our legal dream team joined in with the cities, but we expanded our argument because although there's some technical, contractual, quasi-contractual legal issues involved, survivability and all that kind of stuff, and that's great. Our group latched on to that. We also expanded the lawsuit by bringing in an equal protection claim under the 14th Amendment, because we're saying, yeah, all that technical stuff is true, and they violated that, but even beyond that, they did it because it was racist. They did it motivated by racism against Black people. So with the city's great lawyers doing their thing and our great lawyers doing our thing, I'm confident that we'll win. Now, I got to be honest, after we win, assuming we do on district court, then the federal government has the right to go to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And if we win there, as I'm confident we will, it goes up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm not confident in the U.S. Supreme Court, but I have enough time to go into detail about it. But remember what I said about 10 minutes ago. We have attorneys raising legal issues in the courts. We got activists raising hell in the streets. So if the activists can't win, the lawyers can. If the lawyers can't win, the activists can. Or we both can win. The great Frederick Douglass said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will." He also said, "Agitate, agitate, agitate." And if you're a student of history, you look back at our enslaved ancestors. They had less. They fought and eventually won. Let's look back at our ancestral or elder sharecroppers. They had less, but eventually they won. Look at those who fought against Jim Crow up to the 50s and 60s, and in some cases up to the 70s. They fought and won. And now we're here as Black people in 2026. We got more money than they had. We got more resources than they had. We got more education than they had. So because we got more stuff, it should be so easy for us to win. And it is easy for us to win all racial battles if we come together. And that's why ATTAC, ATAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition, ATAC, ATTAC, Avenging the Ancestors Coalition. That C at the end is for coalition. That means you bring in people. And you might not agree with everything they're into. It might be Christians joining with Muslims. It might be young people joining with old people. It might be gay people joining with straight people. It might be rich people joining with poor people. But it's all Black people coming together for a common goal. And in light of what the guy in the White House did to that historical site known as the President's House / Slavery Memorial at 6th and Market, in light of what he did on January 22, 2026, at about 2:57 p.m., we are talking about expanding our horizons. So we got more white people to join us. We got more Latino people to join with us. We got more Asian people to join with us. So the Army has become bigger and bigger and bigger. Or it's our Navy, or it's our Air Force, or it's our Marines, whatever you want to call it. Our military forces have expanded and come together. We can argue and fight about other stuff later. If there are 100 political issues in a bag, and inside that bag, there are 99 that we completely disagree upon and fight each other for, but there's one among that 100 that we agree upon. Well, let's put those 99 to the side and focus on the one. Prime example. People know me as this angry Black man, the angriest Black man in America. They also know me as what I am, a Pan-African socialist. And then there's a guy by the name of Sam Katz. Sam Katz ran for mayor a couple times in Philadelphia, and he ran as a Republican because he accepted the Republican ideology. Well, Sam Katz today is standing shoulder to shoulder with me, Michael Cord, aka Michael X, on this one issue. We might disagree on 99 other issues among 100, but on this one we agree. So if Michael Cord and Sam Katz can come together on this event, you can join us. And what is this event? This event is more than an event, to be quite honest. It's a movement. And this movement is to not only save the site, but let me break it down this way. Our goal is to restore the site. Our goal is to, and restoring means put it back where it was. Our goal is to enhance the site, which means make it bigger and better. And our goal is to replicate the site. That means because Black people have contributed mightily in every state in the country, and arguably every city in the country, we want to have this type of monument, this type of memorial at other sites throughout the country. And you can join with us. Let me just tell you first thing that I really need you to do. You need to attend a rally here in Philadelphia. That rally is going to take place, and if we have the flyer, I'm not sure if we do have the flyer, right there. I told you that Roland was so thorough. He put it right there. I mean, that's amazing. Roland is really thorough as an engineer and a producer. I really love how smooth and professional he is. You see it right there. Rally to restore the truth. Let me read it to you. Join the Avenging the Ancestors Coalition attack as we stand together, all of us, to demand the restoration of the President's House / slavery memorial. This is a nonpartisan act, movement for the truth, for accountability, and action. And action is key. It's going to take place on Tuesday, February 10 of this year, 3:30 p.m. Where? At Independence Mall on the corner of 6th and Market Street. And you see next to it, this is our new mantra. Attack's new mantra is tell the truth, restore our history. Underneath that, as it reads, history cannot be erased. Our history is American history. Call to action. Bring your voice. Bring a sign. Bring someone with you. Stand for the truth. And what you all need to do is to email us and get more information. Before that, remember I said I had 2 assignments for you. One is to attend that rally on Tuesday, February 10, 3:30 p.m. at 6th and Market. In addition, we have ongoing a petition drive, and we need you not only to sign that petition, but we also need you to pass out and disseminate that. Again, here's Roland doing what he does so very well. Right there, I was going to have to read everything to you, but he posted it for you. Change.org/restore our history. Let me repeat that. Change.org//restore our history. And big shout out to public relations professional Dawn Chavou. Dawn Chavou came up with this idea. We consider her as an attack member who is our chief strategist because she's so thorough in putting the word out. So we need you to, right now, you're looking at it. You can screenshot it. You can write it down, change.org/restore our history. That is the petition to not only restore our history at that site, but remember what I said, restore, enhance, and replicate. We have an army of people who are trying to help us, and we will have marching orders for those people. We have several assignments out there that we still need completed. If you want to do something to save that site at 6th and Market, if you want to do something to restore that site at 6th and Market, if you want to do something to enhance that site at 6th and Market, if you want to do something to replicate that site at 6th and Market, you must email us and we'll find out what you can do. The great philosopher / godfather of hip hop, Gil Scott Heron, said it well. Here's what he said. Just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. And I mean anything like we'll give you our social media information. You can just click on like. That's something. Or you can get copies of our petitions and pass them around to your social media friends. Or you can attend our weekly meetings by Zoom, some in person, but most in Zoom, and offer some ideas, some suggestions. And I should say, it's not either or, it's both and. And then we're out on the streets. protesting and demonstrating and rallying. I know that for some people it's too cold. I get it. For some who might be elderly, I get it. Some who are very young, I get it. But remember what Gil Scott Heron said. Just because you can't do everything doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything. You could join with us and you pick your lane, what you want to do. We already have strategies laid out, and we'll give you those strategies. We'll give you that information. We'll give you that advice, and you can run with it. But you must contact us. Remember that email address, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Once again, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Or give us a call, 215-552-8751. 215-552-8751, and say, hey, I want to volunteer, I want to contribute, and I want to be a part of this. Right there, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. Once more, atac.avengingtheancestors@gmail.com. I'm about to wrap this up, so let me do this, folks. In addition to this TV courtroom show that I do here, I also do something called the radio courtroom show. And it's similar to this, but it's more interactive where people can call in and they can ask questions about legal issues, about political issues, about cultural issues, about historical issues, whatever the case. And again, our producer extraordinaire has it right there. It's called Radio Courtroom, and you can find it at WURD 96.1 FM. That's WURD 96.1 FM, or you can just go to the website. What is it? Thanks for asking. WURDradio.com. You can't forget that. WURDradio.com. I am on the radio on WRD every Saturday from 1 p.m. until 3 p.m. Once again, every Saturday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. In my final minute or so of today's show, I can't impress upon you the importance of joining the good fight. ATAC 24 years ago, from 2002 to 2008, fought the good fight and won. ATAC today in 2026 is fighting to save, restore, enhance, and replicate. This battle was to create the site. We struggled for 8 years and won. This battle is to save the site, to restore the site, to enhance the site, and to replicate the site. You got to understand that this is not a battle for Black history. It's a battle for American history. If you want to make the argument that America is great or America is prosperous, you can make that argument that it's prosperous. But you know why it's prosperous and why it stands where it does upon nations in the world, usually at the top? Because of slavery. Think about it this way. If you had a company and for 246 years, you didn't have to pay your employees a dime, you'd have a mega, massive, prosperous company. Well, America is that company. For 246 years, from 1619 to 1865, America didn't have to pay my ancestors a dime. They just took and took and took the blood, the sweat, and the tears. Now they have to pay back. Call it reparations, call it what you will, but at least tell our story. And I'm going to wrap up with the tax mantra. Tell the truth, restore our history. Tell the truth, restore our history. Tell the truth, restore our history. Thank you all very much. I look forward to seeing you at the next show. Remember this, think Black, I'm out.